Here we go. I did promise a very short history of human factors, and as I say, this is like a really good self-selecting group about anyone who'd potentially find that subject interesting. Well done. Here you are. So lock the doors. I'm going to give you a whirlwind ride through a kind of history of the relationship between humans and technology. So any good history starts with a timeline of some sort. It's pretty hard to see, but we're starting back about 4 million years ago. And in about 8, 9 slides, we're going to get to now and the future. So it's going to be, pretty quick. Hold on to your hats. At the end of that, I'll kind of draw a couple of conclusions about what I think it tells us and about things. One thing it tells us we ought to be doing when we're thinking about designing digital systems or interfaces, and hopefully make your work, in whatever you do, more successful. So let's start. The first few million years of human factors is, broadly speaking, hitting things with sticks, or in this case, a bone. But the point I'm making here is that the birth of technology, so when we start to use tools to do things, is actually the technology itself is found rather than made. So you kind of pick up a stick or a rock that's the right size to do the job that you want to do today, and you're not tending to make it. You don't make a stick that's the right size, or you don't make a rock that's the right size. You're just finding the technology and doing it. So you might strip some twigs and bark off your stick, but that's, broadly speaking, it, and you're off. So that's, the first few million years is just us using stuff that we find. The next couple of million years is about craftsmanship. So this is, here is a lovely hand axe that someone has made to fit snugly into the palm of the user's hand, and it's specifically designed to do a job which that person wants it to do. Like at the start of this period, this is about people making things for themselves to use. So this is you make your stick or your rock or whatever tool it is you're making, and you fashion it yourself for your use, so you know what you want to do with it. As this period progresses, you kind of find people making things for other people, so probably in their community. So someone's good at making spears or hand axes, but then that kind of develops further into making objects for trade, making objects for people that you're never actually going to see. They might be traded over distances that you are never going to travel in your lifetime. And that's the sort of birth of the challenge that is actually quite a modern design challenge, the idea of making something for someone that you're never going to meet. So you're trying to imbue into the tool that you're making the characteristics that are going to be universally useful for people who use tools like this. And so even though we're talking about the very distant past, it's kind of, this is the birth of the challenge that we're looking at still today. So any history has always got a clever Greek in it, and my history is no different. So around 500 BC, we see this word being used for the very first time in a written text. So ergonomics is essentially a collision of two words. So the natural rules of work. So it's this was coined by a guy called Hippocrates, who you've probably heard about in terms of the Hippocratic Oath. So he's a doctor, a surgeon in ancient Greece, and he wrote a treatise on how to organize your surgical instruments in a system in a way that when you were performing surgery, everything you need is correctly to hand at the right place in the right time. So that's the first kind of idea that we have about designing systems, if you like, rather than designing just simply the objects themselves. Later, much later, it's actually kind of the industrial era where this becomes technically a science, and it's actually it's only at the start of the 20th century that the kind of rules and scientific process of ergonomics starts to come into effect. But this is where it all began. So so at the end of this time span and kind of entering the beginnings of the modern era, ergonomics takes a branch into the fantastically named. You get ManMachine Interaction. So it's a rather butch title, this, but basically ManMachine Interaction is the idea that we're now recognizing the human factor in the design of very complex machines, so that the design of the machine itself has to reflect factors about the physicality of the person who's going to end up using it. And particularly this, so the picture here is from a fighter plane from World War II. So this is an incredibly complex machine. And if you think about the other pressure that's going on at that time, so you need to get pilots up in the air quite quickly doing what they need to do. So the amount of time you've got to train people to drill them in the use of this machine is decreasing at the time when the complexity of that machine is increasing. So you suddenly get this kind of paradox. And the way you solve it is to start to organize systems in a way that people find intuitive and that where they can recognize patterns in different machines, that they can transpose the knowledge and learning from one machine to another. So yeah, essentially establishing conventions for organizing controls and instruments is decreasing the likelihood that sort of undertrained pilots are going to make what are potentially fatal mistakes in combat. But as I say, it's the branching off of this discipline. If we sort of take that just 10 years forward, later in the 50s, this is another fantastic picture. So does anyone know what this is? This is a launch console for nuclear missiles. So you can imagine, and so we're now entering the computer age, and the stakes are raised again effectively. I mean, the person who's going to sit in that chair there is potentially, has the power to really, really mess up the lives of millions and millions of people. So again, they might be operating under extreme stress. So the organization and design of this machine needs to be very, very cognizant of the potential dangers of someone making a human factor error. So the human factor in this could be the thing that causes it all to go wrong. So for example, where you position the red fire button in relation to the green abort button, and in fact whether those buttons should be red and green respectively, or whether you want further systems other than just having two big buttons in the middle of your panel. These are ergonomic decisions, but it's actually the time when we first hear you kind of see the word usability being commonly used. So this is if you like, the beginnings of this discipline of usability come from this time when computers start to become more a part of society. Again, it's worth operating like the fighter plane before it. The operator that sits in that chair is going to be very highly trained. They're going to be taught how to use the system. They're going to be drilled over and over again in how to use the system. So even though the machine is reflecting some of the difficulties they might have, nevertheless the user is highly expert. But that starts to change as we move on. So the next point in our timeline, rather un-PT man-machine interaction becomes human-computer interaction. So during the 70s and 80s, with the birth of personal computing, we branch again to think about more specifically about this science, about the human relationship with computers. And again, here the design challenge deepens a bit, because the end user here, this person here, is much less likely to be an expert in the machine itself that they're using. They've got a job to do. They're an accountant or a filing clerk, so they're trying to use a computer to do their job rather than the computer itself being their job. And so, I mean, even though if you like, the person using this is going to have training probably and a manual to go through if they come across a new or complex task that they need to do. Essentially, we're seeing this falling away of the presumption of expertise when people are using systems. The other thing I kind of note here is that at this point, there's only a few hundred companies, maybe a few thousand companies in the world that are making computers. Therefore, there's only a few hundred or thousand companies in the world where you need people with expertise in human-computer interaction. So if you like, the field is quite small, and it's clustered very much around the manufacturing of computers and software, which is a problem when 10, 20 years later, we get the birth of the internet. When again, if you like, this sort of science or study branches again into what I tend to refer to as user experience. With the advent of the web, everything changes, because suddenly, instead of there just being a few hundred or a few thousand companies in the world that are thinking about a human-computer interaction around a digital interface, now basically every single company in the world, in a very, very short space of time, every single company in the world suddenly is creating a digital interaction between itself and its customers or its clients in the form of their website. So yeah, user experience is a term that kind of comes into use here. And it encompasses two separate ideas, and this is quite an important point about user experience. That is a collision of two disciplines. So part of it is the ergonomic aspects of design, so usability, information architecture, user controls. But the second element, which comes in because of what we're doing here, is persuasion. So you might say it's a kind of collision between the world of ergonomics and the worlds of marketing, because now, if you like, not only are we trying to create an interaction, an ergonomic system, but we're trying to use that system to persuade people to do things, to buy products or services, or to prefer this company over that company. So that's a kind of important idea that the user experience is an intersection of these two disciplines. And we'll probably remember that the first phase of this was pretty chaotic. For every Amazon and Google and eBay, there were 100 companies that failed, or 100 companies whose website propositions failed. And user experience was often a really big problem in that. Boo.com or Pets.com failed because they weren't really considering the user, the customer, in the system that they were designing. That was not adequately considered as part of that process. Again, during this explosion of suddenly everyone's into interaction design, there wasn't an equivalent explosion in the number of people who have any kind of formal understanding or training in the ergonomic aspects of design. We basically all had to discover it as we went along. And more people failed at that in the first few years than were successful. But at the other end of the decade, you get a slightly happier experience. We've learned a lot of these lessons. We've learned them the hard way, and things are looking up. Facebook is a great example. So this is a personal web presence that pretty much almost anybody can develop and maintain themselves without any training or detailed instructions. So if you like, what it is, how it works, and how to make it work are all really imbued into this system, so that really anyone can turn up and use it. There's no manual, there's no training. So we're sort of starting to be more successful at creating good human-computer interaction. And that's really because a number of useful rules and conventions about design are known to both designers and to users. So little things like the logo is in the top left-hand corner. That's a convention that emerged, but in 1998 that was not at all the case. That one simple function, as it were, could be anywhere on any given page. So as certain standards emerge which are known to both the designer and the user, actually we get a more successful experience. But so that's nice when basically the way most people were doing digital interactions was through the window of a PC monitor or a laptop screen. But the next challenge that faces us today is this proliferation of devices and interaction styles. So instead of just seeing this interaction through a very standard display and with very standard controls like a QWERTY keyboard and a mouse, suddenly it's all different. We've got tablets, touch screens in different formats. ATMs are becoming more sophisticated. This is a smart meter for monitoring your energy usage at home. The Kinect system from Xbox is a human-computer interaction on a totally different paradigm. This is all about it sensing your presence in a room, and that's the way in which you control the interaction. So just when we thought we were getting onto the curve, we're making it harder for ourselves because we've suddenly got these different forms of interaction. Contactless here is something Neil's going to talk about in a few minutes. This proliferation of devices and interactions. And again, some companies are failing pretty miserably. So for example, mobile apps is very much, for me where I'm sitting, very much like being back in .com. There are no established rules about how the interaction works, and therefore lots of companies and designers are guessing at the way in which an interaction should work and guessing wrong. And so that's causing reputational damage where people are not following, don't have established design conventions to follow. So so where does that take us? I mean, I suppose I want to summarize this by saying, so success in digital design means aligning three things, two of which are familiar with two of us. So the idea of hardware, you know, the device on which I'm interacting, and also the software, so the nature of the interaction that we're causing. But the third thing that I'm kind of trying to remind us to consider is wetware, you know, the person at the other end of this system who's trying to use it, often without any help or support from us. And the other thing, and again, coming back to a theme that I mentioned earlier, there's a big talent shortage in this area. So I've got figures from a couple of years ago, but 2 years ago, in the world, there were estimated to be 50,000 full-time user experience practitioners on the planet, and 182 million websites on the web. So, you know, if you do the maths on that, it's like, basically, user experience people like myself, we're not going to be there when you cross the road. The chances are the next piece of design you're going to work on is not going to be working with someone who does what I do for a living, but you're probably going to have to be hacking these things and working them out for yourself. So that creates a challenge in itself. And I suppose the thing I'm trying to impress on you throughout all of this, if you're going to be doing successful design and thinking about the human factor within that design, the thing you really need to be doing is talking to the customer or talking to the end user, finding some mechanic within your design process to have a structured consideration about what the end user needs, wants, believes, what the prejudices they have, what problems or disadvantages they may have physically, so that you can give your system everything it needs to be that system that they can use intuitively and easily. Talking to customers brings a lot of people out in a rash because, you know, it takes time and effort. Sometimes it takes money. But I always tend to point out that, you know, the time, effort and money of fixing the thing that doesn't work when you put it live is almost always counterbalanced by the time it takes you to properly and in a structured way consider the consumer in all of this. So I'm not saying essentially that you always need to do formal forms of research, you know, that sometimes your budget or your timelines aren't going to allow that, but find a way that works for you in order to get the views, you know, and observation of real people thinking about the thing that you're building into your design process. Because there's a lot of talk nowadays about customer focus. I mean, chief execs will stand up in front of you know, their shareholders at annual meetings and say we need to be more customer focused, we're going to be more user centered, and that phrase user centered is becoming very popular. It's some good clothes to wear when you're talking about your design style or the design philosophy that you're going to approach. But if you like dark side and light side of that, you know, here's a phrase I'd, you know, if you like you to try and remember. So, you know, make sure that strong opinions about customers, of which everyone in the room, including myself, has, make sure those strong opinions about customers aren't necessarily given priority over the actual opinion of customers. If you have this, then you're going to be making better design decisions. Amazon, they have a kind of set of company values, and one of them is if we don't talk to our customers, then we'll fail. And if we only talk to our customers, then we'll fail, which I think is a really good way of putting it, in the sense that research and findings from research doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you information on which to base your own professional judgment about how something should work. And that's pretty much the thought that I'd like to leave you with. Thank you very much. Thank you.